continue to come out with their NIMBYism approach. And I mean, last year alone, our committee had 3 bills with folks not wanting to increase the number of units per acre due to overpopulation in certain areas. So while you answer that, can you keep both of those issues in mind?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for both questions. They're excellent questions, and certainly the complexity of the question belies your first statement about your experience on the local level, which is one of the great things going on up here. I think is a lot of, I was here in 03, 04 when term limits were just starting to come into effect, and you've got, there's so many folks now in the Capitol who really understand the local land use dynamic, and that's really where the action is in something like affordable housing. The first thing, there were a lot of points there, but the first thing I would say, and I didn't get a chance to put it into the testimony, but the regulatory framework that California has had for affordable housing is very unique and is very powerful. It's not perfect, but the regional housing needs allocation, of course, is entirely premised on a fair share concept, and one that says all communities need to carry their fair share. And it can be a very powerful tool. I think it lacks the absolute teeth that many of us would like to see. But I will tell you, and you may have experienced this yourself, that in the majority of communities in California, they pay attention to that and they really wrestle with it. And so it goes to your one of the underlying dynamics in your questioning is the fair share idea that communities need, that we have need everywhere. As you've heard today from a lot of different folks, the type of need varies quite a bit across the state. The important thing is that communities are trying to meet it and are doing something about it. And certainly the outcomes are very, very uneven. So I understand the frustration.
Not all, though. Some are trying very hard to not meet those.
I understand. And I see that as well. I mean, I said we have 30 active city and county partners, but yet our business footprint is in a region that probably has 100 cities and counties. And we're working with the ones that, really want to do good work.
And zoning is a local decision.
Absolutely.
And if you never, ever increase zoning
and
you never increase your housing stock, you can make an argument, well, we're not growing, we don't have to comply.
Yeah. On this, but I would just say that it is a powerful framework, but we're headed towards a world that's sort of ironic, where we've got this sort of regulatory framework without the resources to try to comply with it, and I think we're headed towards a very difficult spot in that regard. As to the impact question, I'd like to believe, and I think it's really true, that the model for new affordable housing is much, much different. I mean, everything we're building is, maybe sort of 60 to 100, 120 units, certainly not at the scale that would require building a new elementary school in the community. And I think we've learned a lot of really hard lessons for how poorly affordable housing and public housing was pursued in the past. These enormous developments, over-concentration of the non-working poor. To the extent we can now, we work really hard to have a mix of incomes, certainly on the developments that we create, and hopefully we're creating in neighborhoods where we're creating a mix of incomes. As I said, over 80% of the heads of households in our family developments are in the active workforce. Most are working. Others are actively looking for work. They're very low wage, $25,000 to $40,000 a year, but they're working. They're not SSI households. We have some of those, and that's fine, but we work hard to get a mix. And I think the new model, over the last 20 years or so, I don't know how old that development was in that example, would say, a smaller development, a mixed income development, a higher quality development, so that the impacts you're talking about wouldn't be aggregated in a particular school or a particular district. The fair share is always still a fight. We have a lot of higher income communities where I work that I would say really get the economic argument. The example of the Silicon Valley Leadership Group, we're developing right now in Mountain View, where Google's based. We're developing in Sunnyvale, right next door. But not all do. I know exactly what the dynamic that you're describing.
Can affordable housing projects sustain stand, or can you work in a property tax into your performance?
Well, we could. Our impact fees have been going up in developments, but it would mean that housing will cost more. And to the extent that it relies on public subsidy on the capital side to begin with, then the gap would be greater, because it would mean that we could borrow less. Right now, our typical development, about 20 or 30% of the development cost, we can borrow an amortizing mortgage from a Citibank or a.
If we worked on reducing your impact fees.
So we'd have to lower. It would depend on the net effect. So if the impact fees went down, but then there was a property tax, as leaving that aside, if we just had to pay a property tax, we wouldn't really be able to borrow that money. It would mean we'd need more government capital to build, and costs would go up. I just want to speak to a little bit underlying your question as well, which is the conflict the challenge that you all have, which I understand is enormous in terms of these competing priorities. We certainly view, and have always viewed, that the interest of affordable housing developers is aligned with public school system. We're very big supporters of it. We depend on that system. We believe they depend on us. There's an incredibly powerful series that the San Francisco Chronicle is doing right now on the 2,200 students in their public school system who are homeless, and the challenges those students have just to concentrate, not to mention just to make it to work, to school. And so we believe that we play a role that it certainly shares the objectives of the public school system. We've always viewed them as allies. I personally, and I'm speaking for myself here, certainly understand that there was some compromise that needed to happen on redevelopment, and that's why I'm asking for your help in preserving that compromise. And then we're trying to understand the dynamic here in the state and saying, but we do need more funding. We're going to go backwards with this sector. It's going to hurt the economy. I think the overall effect is much, much greater in lost economic activity when you look at how big this sector is than the $1.7 billion or whatever the plug in the budget is. I understand the bigger issue is with the schools, but that's why we're saying let's identify a new permanent source that would have a revenue behind it. So it's not asking you to, take from other priorities that we certainly, share with you.
Thank you. We have to move on now to our next presenter, Richard Lyon.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm going to hopefully. Thank you. Richard Lyon on behalf of the California Building Industry Association. We all have PowerPoints, and there's been quite a bit of information presented today that I think has been very good, most of which I'd agreed with. I'm going to spend less time on the PowerPoint and try to make this more interactive. I am the Senior Vice President of the California Building Industry Association, and with me is my boss, Michael Wynn, who is the CEO of CBIA, and he also has a development company, Michael Wynn Associates. Just for the record, CBIA is a trade association. Our members are primarily involved in land development, residential, and light commercial construction. The CBI members produce about 70% of the market rate for sale housing in the state of California. As I said, there have been a number of very good points. One I do want to reiterate, and that is that California's economy is not going to fully recover until our housing markets, and in particular our new construction market, are active and healthy again. There's been a number of questions that have been posed here. Mr. Eng had kind of acknowledged early on that there seems to be mixed sense out in the markets about what is recovery and what isn't. California's housing market is not a homogeneous market. It's a collection of micro markets. So if you're in the Inland Empire and you're experiencing high levels of unemployment, obviously you're going to see reduced growth and demand there. If you're in Silicon Valley, San Jose area, where you've got Facebook and Twitter and IPOs going public with a strong job base and healthy wages, you're going to see housing production in those areas leading the recovery, and that is in fact what's going on. The misery index, I think you've heard a lot about it, but our housing sectors are experiencing the worst economic downturn in 55 years. And based upon production levels at the top of the market in 2004 and 5, and then going back to previous downturns and recoveries, we are performing at about 20% of what we would typically consider to be normal levels. And as the state is experiencing an 11 or 12% unemployment rate, member companies in our industry have seen an 80% drop in their employment and in their workforces. And as we look to try to recover, there's quite a bit of distressed properties, both in foreclosures and short sales out there on the market, and it's very difficult from a price point to be able to compete with those deeply discounted product. Even if you're given the land for free, you've got a built-in fee and cost structure. You've got materials and labor that make it very, very difficult to be able to provide housing at a price point that is competitive with a lot of the distressed properties, unless, of course, you're in those higher income areas where housing is seeing a bit of a resurgence. So I go to the next. It's been said that new construction and housing go new construction and jobs go hand in hand. At the top of the market, which was in 2004 and 2005, new housing construction was responsible for about 450,000 jobs. And that the fact of new housing, its relationship to the economy and its relationship to the job base is acknowledged by key experts on markets and the economy. Looking at the numbers, and you've seen some of these charts before, but I would just point out that in 4-5 we were producing at what we would consider to be healthy production levels. It tanked as of 2009. You can see the top of the market, 4-5. The bottom of the market was 2009. We saw over 85% drop-off in permits that were pulled between the top of the market in 2009. And as we begin to recover, we're doing so ever so slowly. What is interesting about this, though, and I think it's been either directly referred to or it's been hinted at through different discussions here, is the mix between single-family and multifamily. As we have been kind of moving along the bottom, and it's been trending over the years to a greater equilibrium between single-family and multifamily permits. And in fact, in this latest year, we are actually pulling more multifamily permits than we are single-family. We'll get into why in a few minutes. This chart has been shown, I think, by Linda Wheaton earlier. We continue to see our population grow while we continue to lag at the bottom in terms of housing production. And if you were to follow this chart out to the 2017 date, we would, if we continue to add about 400 to 450,000 residents a year, we will be at about 42 million Californians by 2017. And let me see where the chart is. By 2017, we'll be at about 42 million residents. And according to the legislative analysts, and I think these are pretty sound numbers, we'll be producing about 124,000 total units. That's multifamily and single family. And that's abysmal in an economy like California's. Where the recovery might occur, this is an overview of the tentative maps that were active and alive as of last year. In fact, all of you had supported Assembly Bill 208 by Assemblymember Fuentes last year that extended for another period of time, 2 years, the tentative maps to at least give those maps an opportunity to move forward. tentative maps are paper maps. You have not gone to final. You're not pulling building permits. You're still going through the entitlement process. So as I recall, Professor Nicholsberg had shown a map with California with red and blue and green and said it was the red Inland Empire areas and the inland areas that had grown significantly. You can see in in those areas, Riverside, San Bernardino, a tremendous amount of maps with mainly single family. The Sacramento area, pretty much the same. It is those areas that are going to lag significantly in terms of recovery. The areas that are more than likely going to lead the recovery are the areas with the higher educated workers, areas that experience lower rates of unemployment, and the brain hubs, like those along the coast in the San Jose, Silicon Valley area, San Francisco, parts of San Diego, and Orange County. And Mr. Hueso, you had mentioned before about the distinction about jobs. You know, some jobs are better than others, and not all housing is equal. And I would acknowledge that is true on both accounts. But I think a job is good no matter what the job is. And what we saw during the last 15 to 20 years was an interesting change in land dynamics in California. In the past, the housing would follow where the jobs were. And over the last 15 to 20 years, as areas within the Central Valley and in Sacramento and in the Inland Empire began to grow in terms of housing-rich areas, it began with lower-wage jobs, but over time, those economic bases began to mature, and it began to attract the higher-end jobs like the tech and the medical, the higher-end manufacturing, and so over time,
like what area? Like what area?
The Inland Empire, the Sacramento areas. Those are areas that over the last 15 to 20 years have been the job generators in California, albeit many times beginning at the lower end of the scale, but they were the precursor to attracting some of the higher end jobs as those economic areas began to mature. As we move forward, I agree with previous speakers. We're likely to see a renter era dawning. That means apartments. That means condominiums. That means multi-use types of housing opportunities. And the reason for that is what's been described here: higher levels of foreclosures and short sales. As people are losing their homes, they need a place to live, so rental housing becomes much more viable. They want to move closer to where their jobs are. If they lost a job out in the Inland Empire, but they work in Los Angeles or Orange County or wherever it may be, they are looking to move closer there, and rental housing is probably the most viable alternative. Investors are getting back into the market, absorbing many of the distressed inventory and turning them over for rental housing. The job picture, of course, is the key. It's all about jobs. Where you have jobs that are active and growing and strong, then you're going to find a housing sector that will be active and growing and strong. Mortgage financing remains tight for buyers. Lending remains tight for builders at this point. Purchasing power of consumers has been significantly impacted, and negative equity dampens the move-up market. Individuals are kind of sitting in limbo who own a home and are upside down in their home, so it's very difficult to be able to move. The Gen X is likely to lead the recovery. These are individuals and families who are moving into their prime earning years, 31 to 45. They aren't the largest cohort, but they are definitely the most mobile, and they have the most purchasing power. They're in full force in their careers, and they're at the point now where they are beginning their families. What policymakers can do to assist a housing recovery: just a couple thoughts. Encourage the economy to grow at its full potential. That should go without saying. enact streamlined regulatory policies that foster development. We have worked over the years to try to better align housing with the job centers of the state and to provide the type of regulatory incentives and streamlining, such as CEQA and permit streamlining, that will allow projects to move forward in a more expedited manner. Support state investments in core infrastructure. Two things come to mind. One are school facilities. Mr. Hueso, as you talked about operations as well, education is key. So investing in education and also investing in the modernization and the construction of school facilities going forward will absolutely be key. Another state investment is one that this legislature has supported in the past, and that's water. We can't have a growing economy unless we have the ability to move water throughout the state. Ensure an educated and skilled workforce. And then in the end, we had to put this in, and this is encourage a do-no-harm approach to housing. And when we say do no harm, we don't mean don't do anything, but we mean as you go about evaluating legislation for its impact and its assistance to housing, make sure that it is on the positive and not on the negative side. The final thing I would talk about is energy efficiency and new housing. We produce probably the most energy efficient product in the market today. We're fully 50% more energy efficient than homes built in other parts of the state, of the nation. So we would encourage the legislature and regulators to be mindful about imposing new and additional regulatory burdens on housing that is new housing that is already doing a significant fair share to accomplishing our energy efficiency and greenhouse gas goals. And we think there's a tremendous amount of opportunity with existing housing stock and programs that could provide audits and then provide for the opportunity for small adjustments to those homes that would result in tremendous energy savings and greenhouse gas savings. So with that, intended to make this conversational, so I'll stop and try and engage in that.
I think Mr. Wen, you had something to add to that presentation?
Sure, if this is a timely opportunity. First of all, thank you, Chairwoman Torres and the Housing Committee for even taking a moment of your time to hear us today. As Richard mentioned, I have a 30-year career in building affordable homes, apartments, market-rate homes here in Sacramento, but as well as the Central Valley. Included in that group of homes and communities were larger master plan communities, and I think taken as a whole, I just did a back-of-the-envelope count for what it's worth between Windcrest Homes and Lennar Communities. I oversaw approximately 100,000 homes and finished home sites being constructed. What I can testify to you this morning, and it's already been well chronicled and overly analyzed, I think, is just how deeply this housing market collapse has affected the lives of Californians. And it's very difficult to calculate that. It doesn't show up in every statistic, whether it be unemployment or foreclosures or lost education opportunities for kids, but it's very real, and obviously you know that through your contact with constituents. Within the home building industry itself, whom Richard and I are here to represent, the extremely high unemployment is one thing, but lost businesses, literally businesses that don't exist today, have taken a huge toll. And then the anemic building activity. You're probably exhausted with all the graphs and charts that tend to look like a ski slope going down. It's not just that we're down to 44,000 apartment and home starts this year compared to 200,000 just a few years ago. We're not looking to get to 200,000 necessarily, I'm sorry. but we're so far from the norm that I don't think I can stress enough on this committee that we still have a long way to go. Obviously, Mr. Nicholsberg from UCLA underscored that with his recovery projection that had us out into, I think it was 2017 and 18. And I agree. That's too long to wait to do something. We've got to start sooner. The million or so jobs that existed in California in the construction, home building, design, apartment building, building supply, that whole consortium of businesses, those million jobs have been pared down. I'd say 80% of them have disappeared in some way, shape, or form. They were non-union and union positions, too. I think that's important to stress. Depending on what part of the state we might be building in and what aspect of the building industry you're talking about. The subcontractors play a huge role in what we do, and I think they tend to suffer equally as we go through this. As Richard pointed out more eloquently than I can, well, it's simple to say do no more harm as you consider bills and regulatory policies this year. I guess we're really asking that you take deep consideration and use wisdom in exercising what really needs to be done. Sometimes nothing may be the best thing, although we're not suggesting that's always the case. I think it's at least fair to ask you, as this critical year dawns, 2012, that you take that into account. Now, bruised as we may be, the California building industry is a proud one. It's a resilient one, I can tell you that. I have the good fortune of traveling a fair amount throughout the state, meeting with builders, developers, subcontractors. And I'm still convinced this state features the nation's top group of architects, builders, developers, subcontractors, building suppliers. It's always been the case. That's not to say great ideas don't come from the other 49 states, but as much as high-tech or any other industry that California imports talent and ideas from, our shelter industry has done the same over the years. This new world that we've talked a lot about today, after the Great Recession, will be filled with the firms that have adapted and most resilient. This new world, by the way, and we didn't have a lot of time to cover it today, and I just want to quickly point on it, though. It includes things like regional blueprints that are being developed as a result of SB 375 and other state legislation that call for more compact and infill homes that will probably face more difficult CEQA and even local political land use challenges. I'm sure you're all aware of that, but it is a new era, and while we want to be part of it and have been in the policy development, it holds its own challenges. And it's also, as much as you've heard about the growing demand for apartments among various age cohorts and certainly the need for more affordable apartments, the new home remains the strong preference of most home buyers. I think that demand fact is overlooked given the economic condition we're in, but it holds up in survey after survey, in age group after age group.
So does that mean I can challenge you to continue a roundtable discussion with our members, our committee members, to ensure that as this new type of home building continues to expand and begins to break ground, that we don't hinder that growth process?
By all means.
Thank you.
Thank you for the offer. And I'll wrap up just by suggesting that, in addition, evolving market segments featuring the Gen X, the Gen Y, immigrant, and older Californians are going to really have to bring out the best in our design and development teams. The regulatory gauntlet that has been much discussed today includes not so much proposed regulations as much as a paradigm shift that took place in the way infrastructure is financed in California. And we're not here to criticize that today, just to suggest that developers and home builders and apartment builders oftentimes function as public works agencies for cities and counties. We put in most of the infrastructure, whether it be roads, sewer, parks. pay for new schools in a large measure. And that, while that won't change, I think there has to be some recognition that in a, let's pick a price like $250,000 house, if $80,000 or $90,000 is the fee load, the burden that is inflexible, it's fixed, and it is what it is, regardless of how big the house is, it's a daunting challenge to try to produce that $250,000 house. Access to capital has been pointed out today, whether it's new debt management problems, or even among our renters and buyers seeking mortgages. So the financing enigma coupled with the foreclosure crisis is really going to make more difficult our already difficult jobs. We appreciate the difficult jobs that you have to do, though, and just ask you to remember that we face similar challenges, and whether it's in balancing the need for housing with environmental protection or investing in communities that have a long way to go before housing prices and employment levels have returned to their sustainable levels. We also recognize that whether it's San Diego, Riverside, San Bernardino, Modesto, Sacramento, Redding, while the statistics are different, and while the dynamic of each of those metropolitan areas may be different, this really is a statewide issue, and we appreciate the fact that this committee would take some time this morning to consider it. So again, when deciding on housing issues in 2012, really we hope you'll take in the best available information and consider wisely the many factors that go into building a home or an apartment. Thank you.
Thank you. Assemblymember Wessel.
Thank you. And Mr. Lyon, I just wanted to ask, regarding the job comment on jobs, do you have empirical data that suggests that jobs,
yes. Oh, definitely.
like low-paying jobs, positively contribute to our economy?
I have definitely. There's no question about it. Jobs contribute to the economy.
No, and my comments were
at whatever level of the
and you have empirical data that suggests that?
Oh, the empirical data is definitely out there. It's been demonstrated over the last 15 to 20 years in study after study about the growing areas over the last decade and a half have been in the Inland Empire, portions of Sacramento, and then portions of San Diego.
And were those like farm worker jobs, or what kind of jobs?
No. I mean, these are new communities that sprung up. These are individuals who would like to work, who would like to live in San Francisco but can't afford a home there, who would like to live in Livermore.
But I'm talking about less than living wage.
Less than living wage?
Can somebody earning less than a living wage?
Well, I have no idea what a living wage is.
In San Diego, we consider a living wage about $12 an hour. So if you pay a worker $8 an hour, that's not a living wage. Can somebody earning $8 an hour buy the kind of homes that you're talking about, new or used or small or large? Can a person earning $8, $9, $10, $11, $12 an hour buy a home?
Oh, I would say absolutely not. At the top of the market, there's no way in the world that an individual
and maybe you misunderstood my question, because right now, in terms of the majority of the programs that we finance, go to try to help people that don't have food on the table. Or, I mean, affordable housing oftentimes isn't even available to somebody earning a minimum wage, unless it's very heavily subsidized, and we're talking about. We call that, 30%, 40% median income gets into, I think 20% is like minimum wage, isn't it?
Well, so I was just trying to think, and Linda will know this stat, but there's a really interesting national study as to the number of hours that a minimum wage worker would need to work. Did you have that? Was it over 100? 131 hours a week.
Up from 120 just a few years
so
ago.
Exactly demonstrates your point, I think.
So right now we're taking people off of dialysis. We're taking them off of very critical dental work that can save their lives. Some people can get meningitis from not getting dental work, and of course the cost of the system blows up. And that's my question. by precluding a very simple procedure that can cost taxpayers $500, and then that person winds up in a hospital costing, $40,000 a week. That's we're starting to make decisions now that are almost very imprudent. So, some of the things you mentioned, as far as regulatory policies, that curve that we saw, the bell-shaped curve go from high housing production to low, didn't come because the state implemented a new regulatory policy. I don't think regulatory policies have changed in the years that we saw that reduction in housing. Something else is happening in the economy. We need to address that. Providing access to capital, providing jobs to people that can afford to buy a home. I think that's the key. Providing jobs that will provide a family the ability for them to go out and buy a home or even rent a multifamily unit, because if we're coupling two families in one unit, that's not really going to help the economy.
Oh, you and I completely agree on that. I think we
Okay.
were
I just wanted to clarify that because we might have been on two different wavelengths. Everything, regulatory policy in California, it's not perfect. I agree with you there. Things can be improved. And I think there was you saw earlier that there's an appetite in the legislature to want to do something about streamlining, about creating certainty in the regulatory process. I think that is very important. I agree with you in that area. Investment is very difficult. I worked in redevelopment. Financing projects is very difficult. Getting somebody from the first step to the very last step is a very tenuous process. It's very difficult. It's very full of uncertainties and landmines, and we need to find a way to improve that. And it's not just going to come wishing. We need actual policy examples. We need suggestions. We need you to come to the table with more specific ideas on how we accomplish that. We think we need everybody in our entire community coming together. I'm hearing about bankers are saying we're lending more than ever, but the market suggests that they're not. Data suggests that they're not. How do we get? I had an idea for a state bank, and I never thought I'd be pushing a state bank bill, but maybe that is a way to create competition in the banking environment. I don't know. I wanted to investigate that, and I'm not going to give up pursuing that, but finding a way to free up capital is something that should be very important to all of us. And your goals, item 3, 4, 5, and even 7 on energy efficiency, you presented that later, all of that requires either some kind of government spending, either a government subsidy. You can't give a tax break if you don't have a tax in place. And you can't spend money if you're not making money. And when we came in and we made some cuts, and it's very unfortunate that we couldn't get more bipartisan support on creating revenue in the state. I had judges from San Diego saying you cannot cut us anymore because our ability to settle disputes in the business community is really good for business. If you're a business and you're owed money and you need to settle it through the courts and they can do that for you and that is forestalled, it's not good for the economy, and that they were making that pitch. I've seen an argument from almost every level, and at the community level, it's bipartisan that these cuts are very hurtful. But here in Sacramento, bringing more revenue to the state is not. We need to change that. Because we need to find, if you look at this map here, at this chart that was presented earlier by the Anderson School of Business from UCLA, who has suffered the most cuts among all the industries? Government. Even more than double. According to this data that they're presenting, government has been more than double than the construction industry. I thought construction was number one. But government is number one. More than double than the job losses to construction. I haven't really heard that. I haven't read about it in the paper.
Well, I don't think we can take a $26 billion deficit to what we are now, $1 billion, and not suffer those numbers. So
but having less judges in the justice system to settle disputes doesn't necessarily help the economy. But that's that we've been moving in that direction without anybody really complaining about that. Having less teachers in the classroom is not going to help us increase educational attainment. We haven't really heard a lot about that. Having less firefighters fighting fires and affecting, safety, and less police
And they all need to be
officers.
housed.
And having, releasing prisoners, I don't know how that helps the economy, but
I hear in your voice, and I can see on your face, the frustration that you feel about having to sit in the position you are and make difficult decisions about cutting specific programs because it hurts people. There's absolutely no question about that. It's painful for all of us to watch. I think when it comes to the housing markets, the land markets, our recommendation is that you take a macro rather than a micro approach. And that's what we have done, we at CBIA, over the last 15 to 20 years. We engaged in SB 375 to try to better align the land use, the transportation, the housing markets on a regional scale to try to achieve our greenhouse gas reduction goals. That's a macro overlay that we thought we could bring value to. We brought the California Teachers Association 12 years ago to the table to develop the SB 50 program for the financing of new schools and for the modernization of schools. That's a macro program that has been operational now for 12 years, and it has been a tremendous success. So what I would recommend, what we would recommend to you, is that when you look at the land bases and you look at housing and you look at what you as a legislature can do, you can probably do more on a macro scale than you can on a micro scale, understanding that you as a policymaker have to make micro decisions about cutting this or not cutting that and who you hurt.
a comma or adding a comma or a colon to a law can make a big change in how that law is applied, and maybe that's what we need to do, in terms of our public policy. But we need your input on that, and
Absolutely,
I
and
think
I
you
would
can
invite
help in a
that.
big way. But getting back to the job losses, I think every sector hurts our economy. Adding to the unemployment line does not help the just Wall Street's view of the ability of our community to recover, and it doesn't encourage people to want to go out there and make investments if they're afraid that their job might be next, and job losses in every area contribute to that. And I hope that we start to look at things as a we approach, as opposed to an I approach, because I think that's what's going to help us get out of this horrible economy, by working together as a community and saying what's better for all of us. How do we work together to do this? And I'm at the table. I want you to know I'm ready to do whatever it takes from a public policy standpoint to approve something that's going to help us get out of this mess that we're in.
Well, thank you very much for being here. We're going to move on to our public comment section of their hearing. We have about 15 minutes left on the clock. Anyone from the public is invited to come up. Thank you again, gentlemen, for being here.
Madam Chair and members, Tim Coyle on behalf of the Apartment Associations of Los Angeles, San Diego, and Santa Barbara. I just wanted to make 3 points, really kind of responding to the hearing. Very good hearing. I appreciate your having it, Madam Chair. And first of all, it's very clear that multifamily rental housing is going to be a principal strategy for meeting, as Ms. Wheaton said, our growing housing needs. So we, on our side, I think the home builders do an excellent job of illustrating to you what the economic benefits are of building new single-family homes, and we in the rental housing arena probably need to do a better job of that as well. And I pledge that we will try over the next several months to do that. But the second point is, whether you're talking about single-family or multifamily, what this hearing hasn't yet focused on is what strategy should we develop and follow to bring about a recovery? What can government do? What can the state government do to bring about a recovery of both single-family and multifamily construction? And I would like to subscribe to the idea that doing no harm or no further harm is something to keep in mind, certainly as bills come through month after month to this institution, which leads me to the last point. I thought Mr. Hueso had an interesting question of Mr. Franklin about property taxes and whether or not affordable housing could absorb that additional cost. And while I don't think he responded directly, Mr. Franklin essentially said, well, no, because something will have to give. If you impose an additional cost if you impose an additional cost on affordable rental housing, we'll have to make up for it somewhere. And yet, Mr. Franklin also touted legislation that would actually do that through the private sector. It would add to the cost of building private rental housing. And what we said in response to that, and he referred to the Palmer case, what we've said in response to that is the state law actually calls on local governments and property owners to get together to work out what would make the additional attempt at getting affordable housing more economical. So it's not a just say no approach as has been implied to, and I didn't want to bring up another bill in this particular committee. This one's over in the other house, by the way. Hope it stays over there. But I think it's important to note that the developer of affordable housing has basically made the same argument that the developers of private housing have said, and that is when government imposes an additional cost, it has consequences. So, Mr. Hueso, I think what Mr. Franklin said to you, he said, well, the price of housing could go up, and by the way, that means more subsidy being taken away from other needy tenants to cover the costs that has been imposed on his particular project. And I would concur. You can only ask housing to do so much. It can't solve all the problems. And Mr. Franklin, I think, was clear in indicating that trying to get housing to do more than it can really do has consequences.
Except, Tim,
we would agree with that premise for private housing. Sorry.
When government is subsidizing affordable housing, we have a right to expect certain things.
That's right. And no one is a greater proponent of covering that market gap that occurs when it comes to meeting the needs of affordable housing than I've been, than the home building industry has been, the private development has been. We've been backers of just about every housing bond there's been in the last 20 or 30 years. So we support that objective. The point is you add costs on affordable housing, it affects them the same way it affects us.
I totally get that. I understand that. I also mentioned that I worked on financing these projects. I know how difficult it is, but my question to him was, can we absorb it into the pro forma? He said potentially. He said it's possible. And I'm not suggesting that we solve all of California's problems with that. I'm simply trying to make some of our investments sustainable over several years. I mean, because he agrees that, if we make an investment in the affordable housing and eliminate the educational programs that educate the kids, I mean, where does it get us? I mean, we have to find a way to come up with a sustainable financing.
And actually, Mr. Lyon, I would pursue Mr. Lyon's report to you that back in 1996 and 1998, the home building industry got together with the California Teachers Association, did come up with a strategy that provided sustainable educational facilities in partnership with the private sector. So it's doable. It's definitely doable.
Well, thank you for your comments, and I do appreciate you being here. I think the common denominator among our guests today were that we do need more rental units as opposed to more single-family units. That is the wave, the new wave. So are there any other, is there anyone else in the audience that would like to make comments? No? So having said that, any closing comments? Assemblymember Hernandez? Closing comment? Since we've heard enough from Mr. Westo. I would like to thank everyone who attended today's hearing. I think it's really important for us to continue this dialogue if we are going to continue to ensure that California moves forward and we begin to recover in this horrific economy that has gone by the wayside. We need to engage you, and you need to continue to be our partners. The promise of do no harm could only be as good as our promise to continue to work together to ensure that doesn't happen. Our doors are open, and I would hope that you continue to seek our input in your ideas, and that we will continue to seek your input and ideas as we put bills forward. So again, thank you for being here today and presenting, and thank you to the staff for putting this very informational hearing together. And having said that, we're adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you for indulging.